Okay. Um, let's, and of course, I tilt it down to the top of the chair and my head rides a little above that, so now I have to sink down and I have to crank the camera. Let's take another one of these philosophical meanderings or whatever, because basically what happens is things come to mind and they kind of trouble me. They were in my brain. Maybe I think about them as I'm walking, or in this case while I'm on the crapper. And then I come up and think that people might want to hear whatever the fuck I have to say for whatever reason. And sometimes people do, but I don't understand that. But I would do these anyway, even if I only had like a dozen friends on an old site that I used to visit who would listen and say, hey, that's pretty cool, or wow, you're so full of it. Just because any attention's better than nothing, and because I'm a lonely kind of person. In particular, what I'm thinking about today is ethics, and with maybe a bent towards multiculturalism and now I can't reach for the word, the concept of mutable ethics, etc. So there's basically three fundamental branches that ethics has always kind of followed under. One, which is the utilitarian principle, what is best for the largest segment of society. And you can fit various lenses over that, so that, we want what's best for the majority, but we don't want to hurt the minority too much. And you can tinker around the edges of this to make it more palatable than the obvious, hey, 51% of the people are happier with this, therefore we will kill this person. We can put some preventation, some categorical side of it, which is another side of it, the categorical. It is wrong to do X, right? But from the utilitarian side, what is good and what is bad is to some extent related still on cultural expectations. For example, maybe you're in a culture where it is fine for a man to have several wives, but it is absolutely wrong for a woman to ever, in any way be even vaguely indiscreet with another male. And under those circumstances, that culture would say, well, this wrong is so much greater that we don't count how the women feel necessarily at all, right? And likewise, you could have a culture where slavery, well, slaves don't count as people, or whatever. You also have, in addition to those, you have the idea of and this is related to the categorical, but the golden rule type of thing, do unto others as you would have done unto you. But again, cultural aspects come into this, right? If you're brought up in a certain culture, something that seems incredibly wrong to someone else, say circumcision or other genital mutilation, may seem like actually a necessary part of that culture for whatever reason. Now, I follow, to a large extent, cultural behavioralism, and you sort of got hooked into it by a Dr. Harris, who wrote a couple of popularized things about taboos and about how there are good reasons, good rationales for a society to have certain mores, and for certain morals to be practiced, and for certain laws to be in place and to be punished when not followed. And many of those don't seem to apply in modern times. So, you look at the Old Testament restriction on eating shellfish. Well, why? And you can come up with a reason culturally why in a certain environment, eating pork, for example, is a horrible thing, and it truly could be bad for the environment in that local region where it is most common for pork to be forbidden, right? In the Near East and to a lesser extent the Middle East, which of course is what we call the Near East now, but whatever. There was a rapid deforestation and a destabilization of the environment, which possibly was caused by pigs, domesticating pigs. And if there's no desire for humans, if humans aren't allowed to eat pork, then the effects that they had wouldn't have taken place. So there was a cultural advantage. And that's kind of one of the things that I look at as one of my core foundational beliefs is, look, every culture has its own beliefs based on this, and they're kind of an evolutionary type thing that says, well, and it may move faster than normal evolution does, of course, but because it doesn't require the genetic changes. Of course, we know different things about actual evolution now than we used to. It may not be as slow, it may be more sporadic than it used to be thought. But the idea is, though, that, there are real-world competitive advantages to having certain habits, which seems like a strange thing to call morals, right? And I don't necessarily follow the implications of what it means to be, a cultural behavioralist. I don't look at it and say, well, then we ought to revise all our morals and maybe some of mine don't apply. Or I can take the egoism principle, which is the third major vein, which is I should do what is in my own enlightened best interest. I should act only in my enlightened best interest. I think when you start looking at cultural behavioralism, you start saying, well, enlightened best interest doesn't make a whole hell of a lot of sense, right? That encourages things which are damaging overall to societies and to their moral natures. But the reason I bring up multiculturalism into this, and again, I'm reading kind of an ethics paper in computer science, which goes into something about, well, one thing we have to do is get rid of our biases. Well, what the fuck are morals other than biases, right? If you believe that one race is superior to another, well, clearly that's a bias, but also that's going to impact your moral choices, right? Just as if you believe that humans are better than animals, and that it's okay for us to eat, to raise cows and to slaughter wolves and all these other things that make our own lives easier and allow us to have more and more people. One of the problems is for the utilitarian principle. Once again, you have to base it on what that particular society sees as good. But anyway, these, I get sidetracked so easily. These biases, we can't really get rid of, right? And if we believe that cultures evolve slowly, although not in evolutionary or even or geological time or anything like that, it's closer to maybe sexual selection. If we believe that cultures evolve slowly and that there's some sort of value to maintaining the different core beliefs of different cultures, then, gosh, then we have to kind of believe in an ethical relativism, right? okay, it's right for someone of this time in this place to have these morals, and they should be judged according to the morals that they have in this time and place. And obviously, look, when you're looking at an individual, they're so shaped by their period, their time, that it's almost unreasonable to try to judge a person outside of the external influences that affect them. Just like, you shouldn't be looking and saying, well, look, for a paraplegic, he's a pretty good basketball player. But who cares about that? He doesn't compare to Michael Jordan. Well, yeah, but you don't know, right? So, to some extent, in order to evaluate someone, you have to take their external circumstances into play. If, let's say we had mixed martial arts, and somebody trained a chimp and put it in there, and it started wiping the floor with people. Is that fair? No, because it's a different creature. It's, maybe it's fair. Maybe chimps should win all of our mixed martial arts titles and we should stop having human fighting. But then again, of course, animals fighting is considered somehow worse than having humans fighting brutally. I don't understand. I really don't understand some of the different things, because again, your decisions, etc., are so influenced by so many external events, so many external factors, that are you really making an absolutely free choice on anything? But I don't know if I've done a free will talk before. Okay, so where do we run into problems? Well, with utility, we run into problems of, because it's based on a given culture. So let's say a culture is very passive and they believe war is just wrong. Well, they can say, oh, it's horrible that our neighbors invaded us and taken us over and enslaved us, but that doesn't do them a damn bit of good. Right? Although, in more modern times, you do see where things like passive resistance, etc., have taken positive, have been able to create positive effects in imperialist cultures. That shit wouldn't have worked against Nazi Germany. That shit wouldn't have worked against Stalinist Russia. And it sure the hell wouldn't have worked against Rome, where there was absolutely no drive towards that kind of general peace. And one of the things that I was thinking of was the concept of, say, nuclear weapons, and what your moral responsibility is if you have nuclear weapons, whether or not, you should be producing them. Are they just too dangerous to trust in the hands of any country? Or if you should, say, take a quick look at, North Korea's got certain nuclear plants. We should nuke them real fast. Right? We should just do a first strike, obliterate them before they get anything that's truly threatening. Or, likewise with Iran, do we need to bomb them simply because, overall utility, the costs might be too high to let them develop. On the other hand, just kind of look how many people are going to die from that. Neither North Korea nor Iran is likely to have a massive nuclear program. They're probably going to be more along the lines of the everybody else's. You got the big three. But everybody else, they probably can't do a whole hell of a lot with their nukes at this point. They can probably take out a few cities or something. But that's sort of a worst case scenario, and the cost of trying to circumvent it may be approximately equal. So you kind of start looking at it from that viewpoint, in sort of a globalist type view of, if we do bomb them, Well, there's a reputation cost, but there's also costs in terms of the actual lives that are lost and how you want to evaluate them. And in a more globalist morality system, you look at it and say, well, all lives are about equal. Obviously, we don't actually believe that. On an individual level, we don't have that. It's only collectively that we operate a little differently. Now, this is what's kind of interesting, though, because one thing that I've noticed with corporate culture, at the very least, is that corporations operate like insane people, just like gamers do, to some extent, right? I've talked about how gamers sometimes seem pathological in terms of their behavior towards one another because winning is everything, right? And sometimes that's self-harming if you look at them within the context of what the game's meant to represent. But it's certainly behavior that you would not expect in polite company, right? Diplomacy is the clear example here, but you know what? Every game is kind of that way. You're out to beat the others in whatever way you look at it. As long as there's sort of hey, I came in first, or even ranking or whatever, there is something that's a little bit different from how I would think people normally interact. And now, what you see with nations is behavior that is similar to the way organizations or gamers are. Sometimes unbelievably revenge-oriented, right? And you can see this with, the Pearl Harbor attack, right? Well, we had to get revenge on that. And that became a large part of the follow-through through the war. It wasn't simply national interests at stake anymore. It wasn't simply cold calculation. Nationally, there was a desire to more fully destroy that which hurt us. Now, a person who reacted that way, who reacted with, well, you punched me and you broke my nose and that fucking sucks and I really want to do something back, I'm going to cut off your arms. No, right? Certainly things escalated in different ways, and it's not like we didn't believe that Japan would continue to attack us in horrible ways unless we gave in. But giving in might not have been a horrible choice if you looked at this in interpersonal situations. They punch you in the nose. Do you turn the other cheek? Are you truly Christian? Whatever. I don't know. Augustine has this argument in this, but it's hard to believe. So one of the things, though, was that I was watching someone's video. They were talking. I don't remember what the context was. It was a lecture. It was a lecture on behavioral biochemistry. And he was talking about how someone was playing kind of foul in a soccer game and how he really got off on tripping that guy into a mud puddle and, just running by him kind of like, yeah, I did him in. And that there are certain kinds of violence that, violence that we accept against people. Certain kinds of things that you can do badly against people that we accept. And I kind of think to myself, yeah, I'm not sure I do. I'm not sure that I do. However, in some ways I do. So, I believe in eliminating problems, right? So deep down, if somebody's playing music that bothers me, I would have no emotional problem with eliminating them. The only thing that prevents me from doing that is the consequences of things going wrong, not being able to hide it well, whatever. Now, I might be a psychopath or something. I'm willing to accept that. It's not like I don't feel a certain level of empathy. but that empathy is not always directed towards their best interests. Sometimes it's directed towards I want you to feel that pain. I know what you're going through, and I want that to happen to you. It's the vengeance-oriented empathy, whatever. My love is vengeance, which is never free. Okay, so that's very much the kind of eye for an eye Old Testament view, the kind of Viking saga type situation. And for me, it's almost like there's this deep split, it's like there's this, you should never hurt anybody, but if you're going to do it, just do it. I mean, go all out and finish them. Make it so they can never hurt you again, type of view. Which is very different from the kind of, you spilled my beer. What the fuck? What's up with that, right? The only reason for violence in those circumstances is, to me, the threat of violence, which is very much how I see international relationships as well, is this kind of dichotomy between, at some point or another, you go past the point where it is no longer reasonable to be rational. And, the question is just how much of a barrier you can put into that. And then once that trigger is reached, it's over, if I was ever in charge of the nuclear arsenal, I would be incredibly willing to make threats, etc., but probably incredibly unlikely to push the button until a certain point, and then it's all over. I take it all down, right? But the question is, where does that, it is worth destroying, it is worth going over every risk, and just where do you snap? And, my discussion on Game of Thrones actually catches some of this. I think for a rational and reasonable situation, it is almost never, there is almost no situation that should trigger you to actually utilizing violence. But that may just be because I have that all or nothing kind of reaction. And look, it's not like I kill people, right? I'm just thinking, when I used to be, say, picked on in school or whatever, I would take it and take it and take it, and then I would respond with an unreasonable level of force coming back, right? At least what some people might see as an unreasonable level of force. But I felt like I was still largely in some sort of control, like people throwing paper at me. Eventually I go back, I kick somebody in the nuts, I turn around and I go back. No concern for what the reputation of somebody who just does something like that is. Nothing like that. It's just, okay, you've done it. There, it's done. So yeah, it's that snap, do, over. Anyway. This is going way away from where I expected it to be. Because where I expected it to be was to be looking at the specifics of the different branches of ethics and say, where is it that the cultural differences make it impossible to overlay something that is general? You could say, well, generally humans have a do not steal, do not kill type of rules. But, not really. For example, we allow the government to steal, to rob, to murder, to do all these things that are horrible as a proxy for us. So in a sense, we're all collectively culpable for that. I mean, if we agree to a certain government, and as a democracy, I think you kind of have to, as something that claims to be a democracy at least, or that acts as though it thinks it is, you have to say, we are indeed all responsible for whatever that government does. Whatever wrong the government does, that is our own doing. And we have to take that responsibility. So if the government is killing people in wars, that we don't support, we should damn well try to prevent the government from doing that to our damnedest, right? Because, you know, whatever sliver of responsibility each of us has, that's a pretty big thing if we're killing, you know, thousands of people. Likewise, if we think, you know, taxation is theft, which it kind of seems to be, it's a forcible pulling away of your property rights for something else. On the other hand, property rights themselves may be considered theft, and obviously the government supports property rights. It seems like, well, you know, why does a company have the right to pollute the air that I breathe? You know, isn't that a shared resource that we should all have? And is that really different from the water? Is it different from the land? Why should any given person have the right to claim something that is not them? You know, I can kind of understand. I own my own body, although there have been times where our government has said, and they still do in a certain sense, if we look at prison, but where our government has said, you don't own your own body, somebody else owns it. It's somebody else's property. It's not yours. So, you know, again, the culture and the enforcement of a government all make for the morals of the time. And can you find a general principle to base these things on? Sure, you can. You can take the Declaration of Independence and say, what a brilliant document. And, you know, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, those three things, I should have those. You can take the various philosophers of the Enlightenment. You can take philosophers of any given time and say, this makes sense in its context. But why would you promote one over the other? Well, you would promote one over the other because your culture has inculcated in you those values of that culture. So the things that, you know, we see that are coming from that Enlightenment philosophy, why would we look at them as necessarily better in and of themselves than the things that we see of, say, medieval philosophy, where things are very, very different, or, you know, whatever. You take your pick of time and place, and there's some rationale, some general thread, something that hangs together the morality and belief system there. The divine right king. Well, look, if God actually put him on the throne, and I believe in God, and God is all good, and they made, and that thing made this decision, who am I and my human-derived philosophies to say, no, everybody should have their own right? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense within that cultural milieu. So then what you come up with is the cultural behavioralism, which is the mightier culture has won out, and it is the one that has deserved the right to exist and to influence things. And in that case, get rid of multiculturalism. It becomes a might makes right on the philosophical stage. You know, and if you start taking that, well, you let it play out. You see what happens. There is no right and wrong. You're in cultural relativism to an extreme there, but I don't know how you can avoid it. The only way you can avoid it is to just take that fully biased view, and we see biases as wrong, of course. Take that fully biased view and say, I'm right. The rest of you may see pieces of it, but I'm the only one who really understands. And that seems, clearly it's consistent, as is a culture's view, etc. It withstands challenges a little better, but it also doesn't seem like sanity to those of us of the human species who are essentially supposed to be social creatures, who have these social compacts that are built. Okay, so let's try to look again, because it's the good versus bad problem. there's no way that humanity can know what's right, or what is good, what is the good, right? So utilitarianism falls apart if you don't have an ultimate good. If all you have is a cultural good, all you can do is say, well, my culture ought to operate in its own best interests. And its best interests may have changed. Rome was right in, say, genocides, ethnic cleansing, etc., that it performed, because that is what it believed it needed to do. Well, then you get into problems in the sense that the Southern slavery culture was right in terms of the things it did to maintain itself. Nazi Germany was right in terms of what it did to exist, and what horrible atrocities to anybody looking from almost any other philosophy would say was there. No, it was right. There was a threat, to that Aryan race or whatever, and that's where you get into a problem on any of these. Because obviously utility is going to be completely based on that good versus bad principle. Egoism, okay, that just takes it to the extreme, and it works. It perhaps is the only one that is consistent in terms of how you can evaluate how different people should act, etc. But it doesn't necessarily give you a good principle to found societal morals on. Because egoism works within the boundaries of society, and you may be able to move those boundaries somewhat. So, for example, the Koch brothers can say, it is in our best interest, and I gotta swap batteries here. It's in our best interest to make lots of money. And if it's in our best interests in that sort of way, well, we will operate within the social morals. We'll take the corporations or people too, and our 501c, etc., and utilize it to manipulate the way the society enforces things so that it follows our views. Clearly, once you start looking at that kind of view, yes, you can have some impact as the egoist, but there still seems to be something overlaying it. The shared view that maybe could be expressed in its own way within that egoism. I don't know if anybody's actually done that, try to project and understand the concept of a shared compact in light of egoism. Because egoism, usually the attack on it is this, well, that's very selfish, which is seen as bad in general, but also it almost automatically generates what seem to everyone's gut instinct, because they're brought up in the culture, etc., as wrongful, right? So I guess what you'd be looking at is an egoism within confines that are mutable, right? So there is no perfect cultural morality. Rather, it is driven by the power of those with the stronger will and the best capability of manipulating the cultural boundaries. Something I'd have to think about more. And then when you get to cultural imperatives, these are kind of nice, right? You shouldn't kill. But again, the government can kill, but okay. You shouldn't kill. Well, you have to start making all kind of provisos. You shouldn't kill except in self-defense when, no lesser act could protect you as sufficiently, and you're still having to do all kind of calculations, just like you do with utility, in terms of trying to figure out what is the harm on me and what is the moral harm on me, etc. And what it all comes down to me, from my cultural behavioralism stance, is more that there is no, you can't take cultural behavioralism and say there's an absolute right or wrong, because to do that you have to understand the whole universe, right? You have to know that there's a point to this whole thing, and no one of us has a mind great enough to conceive the entirety of the mind of God, which would be required for this, if it even exists, right? So the best we can do is just kind of muddle along and say, well, I will do what I can get away with within the cultural boundaries. And one of the factors is I've been brought up in a certain way, so it does harm to me to do wrong according to my culture's beliefs. Well, that doesn't give us anything that we can really enforce on other people, particularly. We have no right then to say, well, murder is wrong, so we're going to kill you for it, or we're going to enslave you for it, because imprisonment is essentially enslavement. Even if you're not working, it's essentially something wrongful, right? You can't just lock somebody up in your basement. And the question of which is more moral, which hurts the person more, which is more effective, these are all questions you can ask. I don't know about the which is more moral, but which is more effective, which is more punishing to the person, which makes them suffer more, where is there a right to vengeance at any level? All these things come up within that, but kind of left with this, I think no matter what, the more you look into ethics, and the more you feel that you have to get away from any kind of rigidity towards them, If I'm acting, though, here's the thing, like, for example, I almost never lie. And I hate lying. There is very little that I hate as much as lying. But in one sense, it's not because I know that lying is just so wrong. It's almost like it's part of my honor, part of my self-conception that I don't do this, and that it's a value to me to not lie. So how is that particularly different from, say, I like cookies. I'm going to eat cookies. I honestly don't. It's something that's been brought into me. It's a taste more than anything else. And that's what I think morals really are. They're a taste inculcated by the society. And a part of that taste is a desire to impose your own morality on others, in some cases. Proselytizing. They're nothing more than that. There's no, I shouldn't kill people because it's wrong. There's no, I shouldn't kill people because I will be punished, because I will feel bad about it, whatever. That's it. That's all there really is. And there are reasons why these moralities grow. And thus, if we kind of understand the reasons the moralities grow, thou should not kill, thou shalt not steal, because no society could survive if everyone did so. Does that mean I shouldn't? Well, not necessarily. I should apply my egoism. But in that egoism, I would have to include the impact on myself of violating those moral and cultural normatives that I have already accepted. Do I have a right to impose my morality on others? If it makes me feel better, sure. Can we go into India and try to persuade them not to burn their young girls alive? Can we go to the Aztecs and say, we are going to destroy your culture because you practice ritual sacrifice and probably cannibalism, and we need to destroy this because it's just so wrong, it is so offensive to us? Sure. But likewise, and every bit as much, some really horrendous cultural, moral sets, like Nazism, have their own imperative, and we should not be blaming them for pursuing theirs any more than we blame us for pursuing ours. We just hope that our own is stronger, because it will make, our culture, whatever it is, win out in the end. What is winning out meaning? Well, that depends, right? Because if multiculturalism is part of our morals, to some extent we have to tolerate things that are distasteful to us. Otherwise, we will be violating our own cultural norms. And that's where we're kind of, really, really schizophrenic nowadays. Rome didn't have this problem. Rome said, yeah, other cultures, fine if they serve us well. But you know what? If they're causing us trouble, yeah, just wipe them out. It's not worth it. We have something different now. And it's somewhat akin to personal empathy. It seems to be growing, and honestly, it may be necessary for global survival to achieve this kind of partial tolerance for other beliefs. It can't be complete, because no matter what, people are going to be so offensive. There are possibilities that are just so offensive, like Nazism, that they're actually dangerous, right? It's not just the idea, or it's not just the reality of it, it's the fact that the ideas will trigger that reality, or tend towards that reality, that they have to be stumped out, that they have to be stopped. And that's the kind of balance we have to make. We can only ever be partially tolerant. We can never be truly tolerant. However, certain things can be viewed as, this is a quirk of the society. It's okay to do peyote if you're of this culture. It's not okay if you're not. That kind of thing. Anyway, I've babbled on long enough without coming to anything of any value, as usual. So I think I'm going to load this one up. Cheers.